They are not coming back. Read that again. Not delayed, not rescheduling, not waiting for the situation to stabilize before rebooking the flight and returning to the apartment and resuming the life they built in the city that promised them safety in exchange for everything else. They gave up to be there, not coming back. The British family that pulled their 3 children from the international school in March 2026 and shipped their furniture to Lisbon is not coming back. The Russian businessman who moved his family office from the DIFC to Singapore in April is not coming back. The Indian entrepreneur who was 6 weeks from signing a 10-year commercial lease in Business Bay and who quietly let the option expire is not coming back. The hedge fund that paused its Dubai expansion and redirected its regional hiring budget to its Abu Dhabi office, which is technically the same country but carries a different risk address, is not coming back to Dubai specifically. They are not coming back because they did not leave for a temporary reason. They left because a calculation changed. And calculations, once they change, do not unchange, simply because a government holds a press conference, or a developer announces a new record valuation, or a tourism authority releases a campaign with production values that belong in a cinema. The calculation changed on February 28, 2026. And before that, if you were paying attention, the calculation had been changing for years, slowly, quietly. In ways that the record transaction volumes and the golden visa issuance numbers and the millionaire arrival statistics were obscuring from everyone who had a financial interest in not looking clearly at what was actually happening. This is the story of why they left, and why the ones who left are not coming back, and why the ones who stayed are thinking about it. To understand why people are not returning, you have to understand with precision what they were returning from in the first place. Nobody moved to Dubai because of the beaches. The beaches are good. The weather from October through April is genuinely extraordinary. The infrastructure is world-class. The restaurants are excellent. The shopping is comprehensive. The airport is convenient. And all of that is true, and none of it is why the 81,200 millionaires and the 4 million expatriates came. They came because of the promise. The promise was specific. It was not a vague assurance of quality of life or a general marketing claim about world-class living. It was a precise, commercially structured, decades-long guarantee that this city, uniquely among all the cities in one of the most geopolitically volatile regions on Earth, had achieved a condition of reliable, unconditional, effectively permanent safety. Not safety in the relative sense that every city claims. Not safety compared to the regional average. Safety in the absolute sense. The kind of safety where you do not know where the nearest shelter is because knowing where the nearest shelter is has never been relevant information. The kind of safety where your children walk to the corner shop alone, where you leave your car unlocked, where the concept of a security perimeter around your life simply does not apply. That promise had a market price. The market price was the premium that Dubai commanded over every competitor. The extra $2,000 per square foot over comparable Singapore addresses. The willingness to pay $12 annual service charges per square foot on an apartment that sat empty for 48 weeks per year. The acceptance of restrictions on press freedom, on political expression, on certain categories of personal behavior that residents of comparable cities in Europe or North America would not have accepted because the safety premium made those restrictions a reasonable exchange. People traded freedoms for safety. That was the deal. That was always the deal. And for 40 years, the deal held because the safety was real. On February 28, 2026, the safety was tested. The test revealed that the promise had terms and conditions that had never been disclosed. The terms and conditions were the safety holds, unless the UAE hosts American military bases that become targets in a regional war. The terms and conditions were the safety holds unless the geopolitical logic of the neighborhood, which has never actually stopped at Dubai's borders, but had merely been politely redirected around them by 40 years of exceptional diplomatic management, asserts itself on a Saturday afternoon in February. People do not return to a deal whose terms and conditions have been revealed to be different from what they were sold. 300,000 British nationals were living in the UAE when the February strikes began. They constituted the largest Western expatriate community in the country and one of the most economically significant, concentrated disproportionately in finance, professional services, education, and the upper income brackets that generate the spending that makes Dubai's luxury economy function. Within 48 hours of the first strike, the British Foreign Secretary had established government-supported departure frameworks for UK nationals in the Gulf. That is not a bureaucratic footnote. That is the British government officially classifying the UAE as a jurisdiction where a departure infrastructure is warranted. The British government does not build departure infrastructures for places it considers safe. It builds them for places it has assessed as carrying elevated risk. The assessment is made by professionals whose job it is to assess risk without regard for the commercial interests of developers or the diplomatic interests of bilateral trade relationships. The assessment said, elevated risk. Get people out if they want to leave. A significant portion of the British community wanted to leave, not all of them. Not even a majority in the immediate term. But the departure frameworks were used. Flights were booked. School places in the UK were secured with the urgency of families that were not planning to return. Shipping containers were ordered. Lease break clauses were invoked. Employment contracts were terminated by mutual agreement between employees who wanted to leave and employers who, in many cases, were making the same calculation. The British community in Dubai had a specific demographic characteristic that made it particularly mobile. A large portion of it was there on assignment. Corporate postings of 2 to 5 years that had been extended once, twice, 3 times, because Dubai was desirable enough that the extension was welcomed rather than resisted. Those assignments exist within a corporate framework that can be redirected. When the corporate framework decides that the Dubai posting carries a risk premium that affects duty of care obligations, which is the legal framework within which multinational employers think about where they send their people, the posting gets redirected. The human resources departments of the multinational corporations that had sent their people to Dubai were not waiting for a second missile strike to update their risk assessments. The first one was enough. The legal exposure of maintaining a duty of care for employees in a jurisdiction that had been struck by Iranian ballistic missiles, even if the missiles were mostly intercepted, even if the casualties were mercifully low, was enough to change the calculus. The British are not coming back at the rate they were arriving. The corporate postings are being offered to Singapore and to Zurich and to London. The individual choices are being made by people who, having seen what February 28th looked like from their apartments in the Dubai marina, have decided that the weather in Lisbon is adequate compensation for the absence of Iranian missile trajectories overhead. The Russian arrival in Dubai following the February 2022 Ukraine invasion was one of the most significant single-wave demographic events in the city's history. Between 100,000 and 200,000 Russian nationals relocated to Dubai in the 18 months following the invasion. They arrived with capital, significant capital, and in many cases, the accumulated wealth of a Russian business class that had spent 2 decades operating in an environment where domestic asset security was never guaranteed, and international asset diversification was always the prudent strategy. They arrived in Dubai specifically because Dubai was one of the very few jurisdictions that was simultaneously accessible to Russian nationals, not enforcing Western sanctions in any meaningful way, able to accept ruble-converted dollars without the complications that European banking had introduced for Russian clients, and sufficiently stable to function as a genuine long-term base rather than a temporary parking location. For 18 months, the model worked. The Russians spent. The luxury real estate market absorbed their capital at prices that drove the record transaction volumes of 2022 and 2023. The restaurants filled with Russian clientele. The yacht charter market experienced a boom. The private school sector enrolled Russian children. The DIFC absorbed Russian-adjacent financial structures. Then the complications began. Not from Dubai's side. Dubai maintained its non-aligned position throughout. The complications came from the Russian side and from the global financial infrastructure that Russian nationals needed to operate effectively as high net worth residents of a global financial center. International payment cards became progressively less functional. Transfer mechanisms that had worked in early 2022 became restricted or unavailable by 2024. And the ability to move money in and out of Russia, which even the Russians who had fled did not entirely stop doing, because family and business connections remain, became increasingly complicated in ways that affected daily financial life in Dubai. A Russian business owner who cannot reliably move money between his Dubai entities and his remaining Russian operations is not a fully functional Dubai resident. He is a person in geographical limbo, physically present in Dubai, but financially straddling a border that the global financial system is making increasingly expensive to straddle. Some of them resolved the limbo by going elsewhere, not back to Russia. That calculation remained unfavorable for most. Elsewhere, Turkey offered the combination of Russian financial accessibility, lower cost base, and a geopolitical positioning that was genuinely neutral in a way that even Dubai's neutrality, after February 28th, could no longer be described as certain. Serbia, Georgia, Armenia. Each of these jurisdictions had developed Russian-accessible financial infrastructure in the years following 2022. None of them were as sophisticated as Dubai. None of them had the infrastructure or the legal framework or the lifestyle offering. But they were cheaper, less complicated, and, after February 28th, carrying a lower geopolitical risk premium. The Russians who came to Dubai looking for safety found a city that was safer than Russia and closer to global financial markets than any alternative in their accessible universe. What they did not find was unconditional safety. What they did not find was the guarantee that the regional conflict from which they had partially fled would not follow them to their new address. February 28th did not send all of them elsewhere, but it ended the argument that Dubai was categorically safer than the alternatives they were considering. The Indian community in Dubai is the city's largest national group and its deepest-rooted expatriate population. Indian traders were operating in the Gulf before the UAE existed as a political entity. The connections between the Indian subcontinent and the Arabian Gulf run through centuries of maritime commerce that predates modern nation-states. The Indian community in Dubai does not leave easily. It is not leaving in the way that the British corporate postings are being redirected or the Russian financial migrants are diversifying their geographic exposure.